January 3rd, 2026, 3:47 a.m., Caracas, Venezuela. 150 aircraft, Delta Force, CIA operatives. In a single night, US forces capture President Nicolas Maduro in Operation Absolute Resolve. No American casualties, zero margin for error. By dawn, he's in US custody. By January 5th, he's arraigned in Manhattan on narco-terrorism charges based on a 2020 federal indictment. 24 hours later, Uganda's President Museveni is asked what Africa should learn from this. Even me, who has got a short range, I can harm you. But there in space and air, you are at an advantage. This wasn't just commentary, it was a warning about something Africa lost 63 years ago. But before we get into that, drop a comment right now. Did the US have the right to capture Maduro? We want to hear your take before we go deeper. On January 4th, during a youth engagement at State Lodge, Nakasero, an event called Jazz with Jaja, Museveni did something unusual. He gave a military briefing, not about celebrating or condemning the raid, about understanding how it happened. The Americans are operating from 4 dimensions, he explained to the young Ugandans. Latin Americans don't have a navy, Museveni stated flatly. US ships positioned off Venezuela's coast launched the entire operation. Venezuela couldn't even contest the waters near their own capital. 150 aircraft, drones, fighters, helicopters. Venezuela's air defenses were neutralized before they even knew what was happening. You are seeing me in space. I am not seeing you, Museveni said. Satellites tracked every movement. Communications intercepted. The Americans had God's eye view. Venezuela was operating blind. And this is where Museveni's analysis got personal. Now they are trying to come on land, which is very risky for the Americans. There you come near, because even me, who has got a short range, I can harm you. This is a man who fought a 5-year guerrilla war, who took power through the bush, who understands that technology dominates at distance but land warfare. That's where the weak can hurt the strong. The Americans know this. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. But Venezuela never got to make it a land war. By the time boots touched ground, the fight was already over. General Dan Kane's Pentagon briefing confirmed it. Surgical strike, in and out, 0 US casualties. And Museveni saw exactly what that meant. So here's my question for you. Can African militaries contest any of these 4 dimensions today? Be honest in the comments. 1963. Julius Nyerere in Tanzania. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. A young Museveni watching from Uganda. They had a plan. East African Federation. Real political union. Pooled resources. Shared defense. One nation that could actually compete. That was our target, Museveni told the youth. Mwalimu was willing to move. Julius Nyerere, Mwalimu, the teacher, was ready to dissolve Tanzania's sovereignty for something bigger. Kenya's Jomo Kenyatta and Uganda's Apollo Milton Obote could have joined him. They refused. They chose to remain big fish in small ponds. And so Africa fractured into 54 nations, some landlocked, some tiny, many without any capacity to defend themselves. 63 years later, Museveni is using Venezuela to make the same argument he's been making his entire political life. You can have small countries like Denmark, Museveni explained, but they have a center of gravity. When they're in trouble, there's a big boy like the US to defend them. Denmark has NATO. 31 nations respond when Denmark is threatened. Africa has no center of gravity, and you are here dancing pakakini, dancing around. It is very risky, very risky. Uganda. 46 million people, no ocean access. How do you build a navy? Ethiopia. 120 million people, landlocked. Some countries have no access to the sea for economic purposes, but also for defense purposes. You are stuck. How do I export my products? And then the United States demonstrated what happens when you're stuck, when you're isolated, when you operate alone. Comment below. Is Museveni right? Should East Africa unite, or is national sovereignty more important? Should Africa at large unite? We genuinely want to know what you think. Venezuela wasn't chosen randomly. It was vulnerable across all 4 dimensions. But here's what makes it terrifying for African leaders watching. Venezuela had allies: Russia, China, massive investment, diplomatic support, alternative partnerships. Russia demanded Maduro's release, called it kidnapping. China condemned the violation of sovereignty, and neither did a single thing to stop it. Museveni chairs the non-aligned movement, 120 countries, 2/3 of UN member states. Venezuela is a NAM member. NAM couldn't protect Venezuela at all, because diplomatic support isn't military capacity. Rhetoric doesn't stop Delta Force. 2025 US military budget, $850 billion. All of Africa combined, $45 billion. Museveni's argument isn't that Africa can match American power, or maybe it could, but his point is that Africa needs enough capacity to make intervention costly. He knows you don't need to win. You need to make the cost unbearable. Vietnam proved that. Afghanistan proved that. Except when the strike is surgical. In and out, before resistance organizes. Decapitation, not occupation. That's the future of intervention. And that's what terrifies Museveni. African nations that have expelled Western troops, challenged traditional alliances, sought partnerships with Russia, they're all watching Venezuela and asking, are we next? Throughout his analysis, Museveni kept returning to one criticism of the youth in front of him. You are here dancing pakakini, wasting time on trivial things. Watching European football clubs and dancing while other people are in space and we are here saying we are clever. You should wake up. It's revealing. Museveni's generation fought liberation wars. They see themselves as the ones who secured independence. Today's youth, 70% of Africa's population, face unemployment, corruption, leaders who won't leave, systems that don't represent them. The truth is more complex than dancing pakakini. Young Africans aren't frivolous. They're navigating systems that often work against them. Yet Museveni's strategic point stands. While Africa focuses internally, the great powers are competing across all 4 dimensions, and Africa remains vulnerable. I'm glad East African leaders have never given up on EAC Federation, Museveni said, so that we're able to unite our land and sea space. The East African community exists. Common market, some integration, but political federation, shared defense, still distant dreams. At 81, running for his 7th term on January 15th, in 10 days, Museveni is still fighting the battles of 1963. On January 3, 2026, the United States demonstrated it could capture a sitting head of state based on a 2020 federal indictment and execute the operation with surgical precision. The official justification: enforcing US law against narco-terrorism. The reality, more complex. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves, strategic location, and challenged US interests for 2 decades. Across Africa, leaders watched and understood the deeper message. Museveni articulated it clearly. Without capacity across sea, air, space, and land, sovereignty is conditional. It exists until a stronger power decides otherwise. In 2026, Museveni is still making the same argument, still warning about the gaps, still pushing for federation. The question is whether he's right, whether unity is even possible, whether smaller nations can maintain meaningful sovereignty in a world dominated by superpowers. This is what we are talking about with the Africans. The question is whether Africans are listening, and whether listening is enough. So what do you think? Drop your answers to those questions in the comments. Is African unity realistic or just rhetoric? Could what happened to Venezuela happen in Africa? Is Museveni the visionary he claims to be? If this video made you think differently about African sovereignty and military capability, hit that like and subscribe button for more deep dives and fascinating historical flashbacks. See you in the next one.